Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Brianna Martinson, and today I will be presenting my undergraduate research, Stumbling into Virtual Worlds, How Resolution Affects Users' Immersion in Virtual Reality and Implications for Virtual Reality and Therapeutic Applications. So first off, what is virtual reality, better known as VR? It's a medium that creates virtual realities, which sounds pretty redundant. So what are these virtual realities? They're interactive, immersive, simulated environments of real and imagined experiences. So I have over here 3 examples. Starting on the right side, I have an example from Progressive Insurance, where users put on the virtual reality and they drive around in a boat simulator. And then here in the middle, a training simulator from Walmart, where the users put on the headset and they train before going out on the field. And then finally, this last one over here called A Field Trip to Mars, where they replaced all of the glass panes in a standard school bus with some displays. So to the children, it appeared that they were driving around on Mars, when in reality, they were just driving around in Washington, DC. This is all possible due to VR. A little bit of background on VR. Way back in 1957, they had the Sensorama, which I have pictured here. This was the first device to incorporate more user senses. The Sensorama included the sense of smell. It had different aromas and winds to further immerse users. And then in 1989, they officially coined the term virtual reality. And then skip forward to present day in the 1990s and 2017, where VR is being used in therapeutic and medical applications, exposure therapy, different things like that. VR has so much potential, and you can see that over the time. Some specific therapeutic applications in this top left is XR Health. In it, users use VR to do remote telehealth therapy and talk counseling. And then in the top right, an example where they use VR in conjunction with physical therapy. Then in the bottom left, a burn therapy treatment. So burn therapy is quite painful, as one can imagine. So in this application, the patient uses a VR application called Snow World. So it kind of distracts and mitigates from the pain. And then in this bottom right, in arachnophobia VR application, which I would never do myself, but it is quite useful. And I think that VR has the ability to do all of these cool applications because of its sense of immersion. And I define immersion as the degree to which a user believes a virtual environment is as real as their physical reality. I define this term further with the sub-attributes of embodiment and presence. Embodiment is the degree to which users feel their body are inhibiting a virtual avatar, and presence, which is the degree to which users feel they are experiencing a real and reactive environment. So an example to demonstrate what I mean by these terms, let's say you're playing VR catch. So you catch the ball with your hand, believing that you really caught that ball with your hand, not a virtual hand, not in a virtual glove, in a real glove with that haptic feedback. That is embodiment, believing that you are the same. And presence in this situation would be you're throwing the ball to a person or a wall or some sort of virtual stimulus. You're not just flailing your arm around. So that's the presence. Build together to create immersion. So in my research, I noticed that there's a lot of ambiguity in the terminology being used, particularly with immersion. Shin and Bioka and Bengay and Preston's studies equate immersion to sense of presence, while Grimshaw and other studies define presence and immersion as 2 separately different constructs. which is very important since immersion is why VR is so powerful. So in my research, my specific research questions are, how does resolution affect user sense of immersion in VR? With the second question, does this treatment effect vary with game type? I came about this research question as I was discussing with ambiguity, and there is a lot of different elements and specifications involved in VR technology, just as any other technology. First and foremost, the main device in VR technology is the head-mounted display, the HMD. HMD can vary within specifications itself, just like any other device, different CPU, motherboard, hardware, which can have an effect, obviously. And there are two different types of HMD. There are 3 degrees of freedom and 6 degrees of freedom. A 3 degree of freedom HMD is very similar to a panoramic photo. So you can move the X and Y axis, and that gives you different perspective. But then once you get into a 6 degrees of freedom HMD, you also gain the Z axis, and you can walk around in the virtual environment, and it gives a whole new perspective. I think that's a huge distinction. And then besides the HMD, the other big piece of hardware is the controllers. The controllers can vary from device to device. Just as the Xbox controller is different from the PlayStation controller, the Oculus controller is different from the Samsung controller. Of course, the software applications can also vary. The game and media elements, whether or not the game has diegetic versus non-diegetic elements. And what this refers to is, like in Call of Duty, you can see your ammo clip or your health bar. You can't actually see those things in real life. Those are made up statuses to help you in the game. So distinction between those two elements affects users' immersion. Similarly, the genre will also affect. You're going to have a different experience when you're playing Call of Duty, that first-person shooter, versus a storytelling game like Mario. And of course, the individual user's prior experience also changes their sense of immersion. How susceptible is that individual to that sort of experience? What is that individual looking for? That can also affect. So in my study, I specifically used the Oculus Quest 2, which I have here for you guys to see today. I'll pass this around while I explain it. It uses 3D positional audio, and what this means is that if it sounds like something's coming from behind, the surround sound system will reflect that. It uses 6 degrees of freedom tracking. So this is one of the devices that you also have the Z axis and you can walk around in. It has a single fast switch LCD display, which runs at 1832 by 1920 resolution. Has a 72 hertz refresh rate, and that refers to how often the screen is getting a new image from the hardware. And during the time of the study, the headset ran on operating system version 31. So in my study, as I stated earlier, I'm specifically studying rendering resolution, which is the image's quality. So all the participants played the game between 2 treatment levels, a low resolution at 512 pixels per square inch, and high resolution at 2048 pixels per square inch. And you can see from these pictures, there is a difference in the quality. If you specifically look at this billboard right here in 2048, you can make out that that says Gravity Radio pretty easily. But then over in 512, you can barely see that that says anything at all. So there's obviously a difference in the quality. I also ran all of the games with a heads-up display to ensure that only the rendering resolution is what changed. You can see pictured here the heads-up display that was tracking the frames per second. Technology jips randomly sometimes, but consistent frame rates between the two, so you use just resolution that changed. And as I mentioned, all of the participants played 3 games: situational, objective, and narrative, either at the low resolution or at the high resolution. So for situational game type, I chose Ritchie's Plank experience. In this game, it puts users in front of an elevator, and they're tasked to enter the elevator, which brings them to the top of a skyscraper. They overlook a plank, and they must walk out onto the plank. I define a situational game as a game with no clear objective or purpose. It simply places a user in a situation and enables the user to choose their actions to said situation with no prompts. This definition is also reflected by Ritchie's Plank experience description of the game. It is defined as a psychological experience. So a situational game, just an experience. And then for the objective game, I chose Oculus First Contact. In Oculus First Contact, it places users in this RV, and they have several little objects and knickknacks to interact with, and this little robot dude to talk with. And I define objective game as a game with clear goals without a necessary narrative or reason behind said goals, more like a checklist. You must do all of these things. And again, my definition is reflected by Oculus First Contact description. It is a toy box, sandbox type game, allowed to let users get acclimated to the VR world. Lastly, for the narrative game, I chose Ghost Giant. In it, you're this huge ghost. These are your hands. And you're trying to help out this little dude named Louis who's having a bad day. So you got to interact with him in the world. I define a narrative game as a game with a story arc involving conflict, resolution, interactive characters with narrative and personality. These are more of your stereotypical type games that you see, just like Mario. The princess has been taken, you must save the princess. A clear goal, a story arc. And again, this is reflected by Ghost Giant's description. It's just a simple game. Now I will be talking about the experiment and the results of the study. So 31 participants came to the study, and I used 30 of the 31 participants' data. I did not include one of them because they did not see the backside, so I threw out their data point to ensure study integrity. I collected 4 demographic variables from the participants: their age, gender, previous VR experience, and previous video game experience. 2 controlled variables, the game type and the resolution. And 1 dependent variable was collected from each participant, immersion. And over here, I have shown the demographic breakdown, the age and gender. And here I have the demographic breakdown of their previous experience with VR and video games. So as I mentioned, the data, the dependent variable in my study was immersion. And I collected this from each participant after each game through this questionnaire, the emergency questionnaire. And I averaged together their answers. And I have for all of you guys in person a copy of the questionnaire. As you can see the backside, so that one participant didn't see it, so I threw that out. Yeah, they saw it at the end after the 3rd game. So they went back and completed the backside of game 1 and 2. And that messes with the integrity. There's some bias there. So I threw that out. Here is an overview of the results from the study, separated by, again, those 2 variables, the treatment level and the game type. Here are the results specifically for question 1, studying the comparison between the high and low resolution. Got a p-value of 0.70. And then here are the results specifically for research question 2, studying if the treatment varied between game type. I got a p-value of 0.01. So the findings of my study, specifically for research question 2, whether or not resolution affects user sense of immersion, I got the calculated p-value of 0.71, which shows no statistical significance. So we cannot reject the null hypothesis. And what I mean by this is that my study revealed that the resolution did not affect user sense of immersion. So the high and low did not affect their immersion. And then the findings for research question 2, does the treatment effect vary with game type? I calculated a p-value of 0.01, which does show statistical significance, so we can reject the null hypothesis. And what that means is that the game type did in fact affect user sense of immersion. Specifically, the situational game type was found to be more immersive than the objective and narrative game type. So some modifications that I would do in my future work, I would further investigate if resolution affects user sense of immersion in virtual reality. I would do this by consecutively testing the comparison between high and low. I would have them play the exact same game at a high resolution and then at a low resolution to see if the participant knew that the quality could be better, if then it would affect their immersion. Similarly to, you don't know you need glasses until someone puts glasses on your face and you're like, wow, it's a whole lot more clear when you did that. So maybe if they knew that there was a difference, then there would be a difference. So I would test that. I would also, in future work, use live brain activity feed measurements such as an EEG or an fMRI or a breathing monitor, heart rate monitor, so I can get a more accurate characterization of users' responses to the current activity. You cannot accurately recall past experiences, you just can't. So I would want to use the live feed so then I can get an active reading for their immersion. Some limitations that came up during my study. I was unable to study frame rate. That was the first question that I was looking at rather than resolution, but I was unable to isolate that variable. I also had some problems with recalibration. So users would put on the headset, and even though I had a big enough play space, sometimes the Quest would recalibrate and users would run into the Guardian. Yes, the Guardian is a built-in software in the VR. So if the user comes too close to a wall, it will tell them so they don't run into the wall. But sometimes you would recalibrate and they would run into that anyways. Not the wall, the Guardian. I also had a very small sample size. This could have been due to COVID or just people not wanting to show up. So I would want to repeat the study with more people. I also had limited demographic data. I had 60 responses to my demographic survey, but I only had 31 people show up. And because I wanted to keep the participant's identity anonymous, I cannot say for certain which of the 60 people actually came. So in the future, I would collect the demographic data actively when the participant comes to the study. So I have a 1-to-1 ratio. I would also like to measure immersion and its related properties of embodiment and presence separately in the future. So then I can have more data points rather than just immersion. So my study investigated the potential effect of rendering resolution on the immersions in virtual reality. And the results revealed that rendering resolution did not affect user sense of immersion. But in fact, the game type did affect user sense of immersion. Specifically, situational game type was found to be more immersive. This leads to the future implications of study, questioning what all factors affect user sense of immersion in virtual reality to better maximize their immersion and user experience for applications in therapy and medical. Thank you all for your time. Does anybody have any questions?
Mayor, did you explain the meaning of the questions prior to?
The questionnaire, I pulled that from another study, and they do say to leave the interpretation subjective.
Brianna, was there anything surprised by the results that you found surprising?
I was surprised that resolution did not make an effect, because you can see over here, like that's so clearly different. I really was expecting this to be more immersive, and that's why I would want to in the future do it again and see if it's a glasses type of effect. But that was not the result that I was expecting. And in my literature review, there was a very similar study that found that the higher quality improved immersion, or that study specifically was looking at presence, but I was expecting the same sort of result, that the higher quality would be more immersive.
Just one clarification about the similar study. The similar study.
Correct.
And also, as I recall, groups to the lower and the higher treatment.
I would have to look back at that.
Yeah, I think that in terms of how it was administered.
They were randomly assigned. So everybody either played the 3 games at low or the 3 games at high. And I was not aware of their assignment.
Just a comment, not a. I saw the 2 images. World. Variable for your study.
That's a good question. It was really funny when Brianna and myself were working on it. We came up with the glasses theory. Like, you don't know you need something. Like, all of us who have ever wore glasses, right? You take them off for enough time, you think that's your role.
Similar to that comment, I had participants make the comment of, man, it is hard to see that, or that's blurry. And they didn't reflect that in their responses, but I did hear that. So.
Also, okay. Okay. Impact that a mask has.
I 100%. I thought about that when I started this research. I had glasses. There is actually this really cool thing. Only the Oculus does this, but you can take this off. And this is an additional glasses barrier, so it does not affect. And this is the only HMD that does that.
I wonder if it may have shown up as within subject manipulation if the individual went from low to high or high to low.
Like between games?
Matt, are you saying like?
Yeah, I was just thinking within an individual game, but I had to step out, and my graduate student told me that you addressed that. So if they had shifted from one resolution to another, if that would have had a bigger impact rather than just between groups having different resolutions.
Comment that I made, and whether a man might be interested in supporting really a question of nonsense. So to me, my interesting question would be, is there any way that you can get a spectrum of resolutions and see what sort of curve in terms of immersiveness, whether a manufacturer might be willing to help out
We'll bring for a variety of resolutions. And we have manufacturing level allowing the user to choose which resolution they actually want to. If you're playing a game and you see like maybe 9 boxes, and then you can pick like, hey, I like a computer at home. I'm using a much I was like, I can't see the moderation back here because I need them much larger. So maybe, that could affect.
It's clearly an important aspect because all of the big AAA games nowadays, you go into your settings and you can change your graphics. So it's clearly important.
right. You also have the trade-off. Frame rate and acuity.
Right.
The higher the acuity,
Right. Which is why my original question was frame rate. I thought that was more interesting, but
I think frame rate would definitely be interesting. Like if they're focused on frame rate, and we were speaking with Mr. Hall just in passing, Mr. Hall can't do it in a certain.
right, exactly.
So I thought the question when she originally about the new
Oh, my goodness. I meant to pass this out, but this is the question, the flyer that I used to gather my participants. And it had IRB approval as well.
your question.
what actually happened. Because I've played this, but you might want to explain to everyone. Like, this is the picture.
Yeah, so this is like right when the elevator opens, and she was scared of heights and she was not anticipating. I put on my survey that if you have I want to say arachnophobia, whatever the fancy term is for being scared of heights, said if you have that, please don't come. But she came and she was like, oh, it's just a video game. I'm not going to get scared by it. And the elevator opens up and she was like, oh, wow, I can't do that. And she tried a little bit and she was like, no, I really can't do that. And I said, well, that's, you're still experiencing the experience. So it's okay. I'm not pushing you to do anything. So she just stared, did that a couple of times, and then went back down.
She's never done it. It's very realistic. I've actually jumped off the plane too. So.
And I made sure that my participants didn't do that. I told them not to jump off the plane.
It was very realistic. No, no broken ankle, but I laughed at me and her research assistant too. They laughed at me, but I like that.
Can't do it without flinching too.
One thought on this, like looking at this, these two stills. Don't really need much resolution. The effect of
Right, which is what I found. It just seems to be such an immersive experience because it incorporates, you can walk around, you can see your hands. Doesn't really matter how good it looks, it seems. Everybody just thought that this technology was amazing.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that right here, like the point of the game is you can move your head and you can see the parallel.
Mm-hmm.
But if the point of this signs and collect points based on the sign, then the resolution would be a poem.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
So depending on what you're trying to do with this exact scene, you're really just stand there enjoying it. Like you don't have anything to do but other than like feel the space. Which
Mhm.
you still get that sensation of being on time.
See, what I thought is, I don't remember the fancy term, but where it's like jaggedy, the motion tearing, to me, that would mess up the perception because, whenever I look at this corner, it's not jaggedy, it's clean. Just like these lines over here are just significantly cleaner than the ones over here. That's what I thought. I thought that would mess with somebody's depth perception, which would therefore mess with their presence and immersion.
Obviously, never been nearsighted.
I don't mess with someone's immersion then.
What do you need to do that?
But if you're like,
Oh, Jeff, is
any theories why the narrative or objectives came?
I think it's because of the psychological and extra emotion that people felt from the situational game, because this triggered more feelings than the other games. It had that fear of being up at a tall place rather than just interacting with a little dude or something else, getting their emotions and their endorphins going. That would be a further research question.
Yes.
Point about fear. Blanchard talks about 7 stimuli that people will and grab people's attention. Stuff like ionosphere. And no elements of fear.
I think that showing that the game type does have an effect reinforces that point as well. It's very critical to decide which game to pick for this study. And for comparing the glasses effect, just like you said, this probably wouldn't matter as much even with the glasses effect because that's not their focus. Maybe one of the other games that wasn't as immersive.
Yeah.
Each game probably took about 15 minutes. The entire study took an hour and a half.
So my follow-up question then is, if they were more immersed in VR, would they, what is the things that we're trying to, it's all brand new. What about an hour or two in VR? Would you eventually start noticing, like you're saying, the tears, like would it start to make
That makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's another.
If the same participant and put them in the same games, that's that.
Like if they were anticipating what was going to happen in the game.
Habituation.
Yes. And that's also why in further studies, I want to have the live brain activity, because as soon as an action becomes habitual, the brain activity is different than when it's a learning experience.